What would you do if you heard a child crying deep in the forest? But what you found wasn't human. That morning, I was just walking under the misty spring canopy of the Ouachita woods when I heard it. A cry, high, broken, full of pain. Not an animal, not quite human. And then I saw it. A small creature, brown fur soaked in dew, trembling by the roots of an old tree. Wounded, helpless, and as I held it, it stopped crying and clung to me, as if it knew I was its last chance. But here's the truth no one tells you. This was no lost animal. It was a baby Bigfoot, and it wasn't lost. It was hunted, not out of fear, but out of greed. I've lived beside these woods my whole life. I don't scare easy, but that day, I crossed into a world few have ever seen, and even fewer have returned from. Stay with me, and I'll tell you why no one's ever captured a Bigfoot, even when the signs are everywhere. What happens when you step into their land uninvited, and how one wild creature taught me the meaning of compassion and courage. I never brought back proof, but I carry a truth I'll never forget. And maybe, just maybe, you were meant to hear it. Now I want to know, where are you watching from? What's your name, dear friend? Because I believe this story can go further than we imagine if we share it together. So if this touched your heart, leave a like, subscribe, and join this quiet but powerful community of Bigfoot believers. From the deepest woods of Arkansas, sending you my warmest love. It was the kind of morning where the forest held its breath. A late spring chill clung low in the hollows, turning the ground soft and the pine trunks slick with mist. The air smelled of wet bark, moss, and the memory of rain that never quite stopped falling. Birds murmured without urgency, their songs broken like half-finished prayers. Marianne Whitaker, mare to the few who still called, moved slow, steady, boots pressing into soil damp enough to remember each step. She didn't carry a map. She hadn't needed one for years. Not in these woods. A narrow trail curled along the ridge above a shallow gully where runoff pooled after stormy nights. Mare had been walking it since before the war, before marriages and funerals, before arthritis claimed her knuckles one by one. This forest had seen the version of her that wore lipstick and the one that buried a nephew with shaky hands. It knew her quiet, and she knew its silence, which is why the sound stopped her cold. It cut through the air like a splinter in the skin of the world, high and broken, the pitch too sharp, too wild to be any fox or coyote. A child's cry, but dragged out too long, not calling for help, hurting, like breath that kept trying to scream even after the body didn't know how anymore. Mare froze mid-step. Her left hand hovered just above her jacket zipper, not knowing whether to close tighter or open wide. The sound came again, closer this time, shivering the edge of the ravine. Not rhythmic, not right. It bent at the end, like a sob caught in the throat. The forest shifted, not with wind. There was no wind, but inattention. Like everything else had paused to listen too. She stepped off the trail. It was the sort of thing people from town warned against. Leaving the path. Trusting a sound you couldn't place. But Mare had long since stopped fearing what most folks feared. She moved downhill, one palm grazing a slick trunk for balance, boots sinking into soft patches of moss and rot. The cry came again, and this time it ended in a choking silence that tightened her chest. She found it in a hollow framed by old rocks and ferns, where the sun barely reached and the trees leaned inward like mourners. At first, she thought it was just a lump in the mud. Something fallen, maybe. A burned log. Then it moved, small but not small like a rabbit or raccoon. Bigger. 3, maybe 4 feet tall, curled inward. Fur clung wet and dark to its back, black-brown with streaks of clay and leaf rot. One leg twisted at an unnatural angle, swollen at the joint. Blood had darkened the fur near the ankle, not gushing but slow and old, like a wound left to ache. Its chest rose fast, sharp, and then the head turned toward her. Mare didn't breathe. Eyes, too wide for an animal, too human in the fear. Face matted with filth, but shaped wrong. Not ape, not bear. Something else. Skin darker than the fur, thick-browed, lips pulled in around teeth it didn't bear. She'd heard stories, everyone in the Ozarks had. But seeing it, seeing the tremble in its hands, the way its small body fought to disappear into the earth, it was different than she'd imagined. Not legend, not threat, just small, alone, hurt. Mare stepped forward without thinking. One foot, then the other. It didn't run. Couldn't. It flinched, a low hiss dragging through its throat, but it didn't attack. Didn't growl. When she crouched down, the smell hit her. Wet fur, iron from blood, and the sharp sting of panic. She held out her hands, palms up, empty, waiting. The little thing made a noise. Not a growl, not a word. Then it reached out. A trembling hand touched her sleeve, then gripped. Mare gathered it gently into her arms. It was heavier than it looked. Warm, shivering. As soon as her coat wrapped around it, the crying stopped, like a switch thrown. Gone. Just breath now, short and fast, the kind that took time to unlearn after pain. Its hand fisted in the collar of her flannel. Clung hard. Head pressed tight against her shoulder. No sound, just that hold, that grip. She stayed there, crouched in the wet hollow, heart beating louder than she liked, ears sharp for anything else. Then she saw it, on the edge of the clearing, half in shadow, half sunk in mud. A boot print, big, adult, man-sized, not old either, deep at the heel, tread sharp. A work boot, heavy but clean at the toe. Someone had stood there, not walked past, stood and watched. There were no prints coming in, just there, and then gone. The way you'd circle an animal, or bait. She rose slowly, adjusting her hold on the child. No, not child. Not human, but close enough to trick the heart. It didn't resist, just tucked closer, as if her warmth meant something it had missed. On a tree above the hollow, she spotted it. A smear of mud, high, shaped like a palm pressed flat against the bark. Fingers long, thumb far apart. It wasn't a handprint a child could make, and it was placed. Deliberate. A mark. The forest shifted again. Not wind, just silence. Every branch seemed to bend inward. The birds were gone, not flown, not scattered. Just gone. No rustle, no chirp. Even the insects held still. She adjusted her grip and turned to climb. Her knees hated the incline, but she moved anyway, boots slipping once, twice, before she found the ridge again. The weight in her arms adjusted, small limbs curling tighter. She looked down just once, just to see it had closed its eyes. The lashes stuck together with tears, but its breath was slower now. It trusted her, somehow, and that nearly undid her, because it felt too familiar. There had been a boy once, thin, warm, always needing something, bandages, a ride to school, soup that didn't taste like the hospital. Her nephew, her sister's boy. Cancer didn't take him quickly. It had time to ruin things first. She remembered the last time he let her carry him. Fever burning through flannel pajamas, skin sticking to her arm. He hadn't cried either, not at the end. Just clung. That memory hit her like ice under skin. She closed her eyes, opened them again. "I've got you," she murmured, the words barely breath. "You're all right now." She didn't know if that was true. She reached the edge of the ridge. The trail waited quiet, pretending nothing had changed. Her truck was a half-mile back, parked where the dirt path met gravel. The sensible thing would be to turn around, drive back to town, call someone. There were vets, rangers, Even the deputy who used to flirt with her when she'd come in for hunting permits. But that meant questions. That meant giving the little one away. And something deep in her bones recoiled at the thought. She looked down. The little one stirred but didn't cry. Not a word, not a single sound, only a trembling stillness. Then it happened. From somewhere deep in the woods behind them, sharp, deliberate. 3 knocks. Wood on wood. Not branches falling, not an echo. 3, spaced even. Knock, knock, knock. Then nothing. Not a single bird resumed its song. The wind didn't pick up. Just silence thick enough to press against the lungs. Mare didn't move, didn't blink, but every hair along her arm stood on end. That wasn't for her, not really. It was for whatever had touched that tree with mud. For whoever left that boot print. It was for the one she now carried in her coat. A signal, a warning, or a promise. She pulled the coat tighter around them both. Whatever this was, whatever she had just stepped into, it wasn't done watching. And it knew. It knew what she was doing. She didn't go back. Not yet. Not with all that silence wrapped around her ankles like vines. Instead, she walked forward, toward the living trees, toward the road she didn't know, one step at a time, heart beating loud enough to carry. And behind her, the forest waited. Not asleep, not angry, just aware. The morning deepened with a kind of stillness that pressed against the lungs. Nothing moved in the trees. The air hung damp, low, like it didn't want to let go of the ground. Mare walked with care, arms wrapped tight around the bundle under her coat, the weight of it pulling on her shoulder. But she didn't shift it. The small thing hadn't made a sound since the clearing. Not a whimper, not even a breath louder than a whisper. But it wasn't asleep. She could feel it, the subtle way its fingers adjusted, the way its body tensed at every broken twig underfoot. She'd planned to turn back to her truck, back to the road. Take it down to Dr. Albee and Mina, or maybe that vet out by Hatfield who owed her 2 favors and a secret. But when she reached the fork, where the old deer trail split toward the gravel road, something changed. The creature stirred. One arm slid out from under the coat, its hand rough with grime and twigs still caught in the fur. It didn't grab at her this time, just lifted one long finger, not toward her, not toward the truck, toward the mountain. Mare followed its gaze. The ridge lay ahead, soft in the light, wrapped in low mist that clung to the trees like breath on glass. She hesitated, heart lurching in that strange place between instinct and logic. "You sure?" she whispered, as if it would answer. It didn't look at her, just kept pointing. That was enough. She adjusted her grip, turned toward the ridge, and began to climb. They moved in silence. The only sound was the shuffle of her boots over wet pine needles and the occasional groan of branches overhead. Her coat flapped open just enough to let her feel how the thing inside her arms kept pressing forward, like it already knew the turns. Like this wasn't a rescue at all. It was a return. Half a mile up, her breath caught. Not from the effort, but from the sharp reek of gas and metal. Civilization. There, tucked just behind a sloping bend, stood the gas station. The kind that hadn't changed since '82. 2 old pumps, one working, the other just for show. A cinder block building half covered in peeling paint and cedar pollen. No cars, no music. Just a rattle of wind chimes made from bottle caps and bones. She moved to the edge of the lot, adjusting the coat to hide the creature more securely. It squirmed once, but settled when her hand brushed its back. Inside, the bell over the door gave a lazy chime. Mare scanned the dim interior. Coolers humming, shelves mostly empty. A rack of lighters and headache pills behind the counter. And there he was, leaned against the back wall, chewing on a strip of jerky like it owed him money. Jesse Rook. 16, maybe 17. Tall in the way young men sometimes grow when they don't have enough to eat. Hair tied back with a piece of shoelace, eyes that didn't startle easy. He looked at her like he'd been expecting her since last summer. "You look like hell," he said simply. Mare shrugged. "Long walk." He tilted his head, studying the shape beneath her coat. "Need anything?" "Bandages, water." Her voice was hoarse. He didn't ask why. Just turned, grabbed a roll of gauze, a bottle from the fridge, and placed them gently on the counter. "Anything else?" "No," she said, but her voice cracked. She cleared it. "Thank you." He watched her for a long moment. "You remember that stray you found last fall? The one behind the post office dumpster?" Mare nodded once. "You didn't bring that one in either." She didn't answer. Jesse opened a drawer beneath the register. "Some guys came through 3 days ago," he said. "Bought wire, traps, big ones, the kind you don't use for deer." She kept her face still, her hands too. "Left a mess out by Little Brushy Creek. Don't think they were hunting pigs." Mare opened the bottle, tilted it to the creature's lips. It drank, slow at first, then faster. Droplets clung to the fur on its chin. Jesse watched it move. "I don't need to know," he said finally. "Just figured someone should say it." She offered a tight nod. "You said it." When the water was gone, she reached for the gauze, knelt beside a crate near the doorway. "Can you look out?" He moved to the window without asking why. Mare opened her coat just enough to see the leg again. It was worse now. Swollen past the ankle, skin puffed raw around a deep cut. A sharp sting of guilt ran up her spine. She peeled back the crusted fur gently, whispering nothing in particular, just the sound of comfort. The creature didn't cry, but its hand shot out, grabbed her wrist, not in panic. In offering, in its fist was something green. A small bundle of grass, twisted tight, woven like a braid. Simple, delicate, too clean to have come from this gas station floor, too deliberate to be made by accident. She looked around, heart hammering. There was no one else. Jessie hadn't turned. She held the braid in her hand, stared at it like it might dissolve. The creature leaned against her, eyes half closed. Its gift, it seemed, had been delivered. She wrapped the leg quickly, gently. As she tucked the gauze back into her pack, she looked up and saw Jessie watching again, reflection faint in the dusty window glass. "I was 6, he said quietly. "Broke my arm falling from the old barn roof. You know who carried me 3 miles out to the road?" Mary shook her head. "Didn't see a face. But it wasn't a man. Big hands, smelled like river rock and cedar, set me down by the mailbox and vanished. Nobody believed me, but I do." She swallowed hard. "When something saves you," he said, "you remember it, even if you don't know what it was." The lights flickered. Outside, clouds were gathering low and slow. A wind stirred the wind chimes again, but they didn't ring this time. They spun in silence. A low growl of thunder rolled somewhere behind the hills. Jessie turned to the radio behind the counter. A staticky voice broke through, half news, half static. Our reports of gunshots in the eastern ridge, possible poachers, local authorities. He turned it down quick, as if he hadn't meant her to hear. But she already had. She stood. The creature stirred. Its eyes flicked open, wide, alert. It looked toward the door, then past it, beyond. Mare saw it too. Across the road, between 2 pines, something stood. Tall, motionless, half-shadowed. It didn't step forward, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching. It wasn't human. It wasn't close enough for detail, but it was tall enough to block the tree line. Shoulders too wide, arms long, still. She blinked once, and it didn't vanish. It was waiting. She felt the little one press harder against her chest. The shape in the trees didn't move. Not toward them, not away. But it knew, just like the forest had known. She turned slowly, met Jessie's gaze. "Can I borrow your poncho?" He grabbed it without a word, handed it over. "Don't go where they've been," he said. "They're not tracking, they're trapping." Mare nodded once, slipped out the door. The storm was coming quicker than expected. The road turned slick underfoot. The creature in her arms didn't cry out, but it turned its head once, toward the ridge, toward the fog. It was leading her. She followed. Behind her, the wind rose, carrying a dry scent of gunpowder and rain. The sound of the door chime faded into nothing. Trees bent forward like they wanted to whisper, but thought better of it. The braid in her pocket felt warm. The little one reached up, touched her collarbone with the softest brush of fingers. And ahead, the trail narrowed, swallowed by mist, pointing to somewhere she had never dared go. Until now. The first rumble came low and long, like the throat of the earth clearing itself. Mare didn't stop walking. Thunder was nothing new out here, but the change in the air, that caught her. A thickness settling in her chest, the way it did before bad things. Storms, accidents, decisions that never unmade themselves. She shifted the small body in her arms. The little one hadn't made a sound since they'd left the gas station, just clung to her coat like it meant everything. Its breath was warm against her skin, too fast, too shallow, like its ribs were still trying to outrun whatever it had escaped from. She felt it through the flannel, those small vibrations, the kind that tell you a creature is more aware of the land than you'll ever be. She followed the slope east, where a narrow creek cut a silver line through the woods. The rocks were slick, and every few steps, she had to test her footing with a boot or hand. Her coat was soaked by now, but she kept it wrapped tight around them both. The temperature had dropped fast, as if the trees themselves wanted her gone. Behind her, the forest was holding its breath again. Another roll of thunder passed overhead, closer this time. The kind that didn't echo but landed and stayed. She didn't speak, didn't sing, the way some hikers did to keep bears at bay. There was something about this quiet that demanded stillness, not submission, but respect. Then the baby stirred. Its hands dug into her collarbone. Its breath went shallow, and its whole body tensed like a cable pulled tight. She stopped. They stood just above the creek's bend, and she could see the rocks below, the soft patch of moss where the water lapped gentle over an old, broken log. Then she felt it. They were not alone. A shape moved across the clearing below. At first, it looked like wind, like something being pulled along in the rain. But then the shape stilled, four-legged, lean, fur matted from the storm. A wolf. Gray-black. Long muzzle lifted to scent the air. Ears alert, eyes fixed, but not on her. On something else. It didn't growl, didn't charge. It stepped once toward them, then stopped, watching. The baby whimpered, a sound too soft for most people to hear, but the wolf did. It lowered its head, took a step back. Not fear, not surrender. More like recognition. Then Mare noticed its ears. Flattened. Not against her. Not against the child. Against something bigger. She turned her head slowly. Behind her, up the ridge, a tree carried scars. Not scratches. Not claw marks from hunger or play. Gouges. Deep, wide, straight. Spaced like fingers. 4 in a line. Too high for a bear. Too deliberate. Like something had stood there, reached out, and told the forest, "This belongs to me." She didn't move. The baby did. It lifted one hand, mud still crusted in the nails, fur darkened by rain, and slammed it to the ground 3 times. Quick, precise, 1, 2, 3. Then silence. Not even thunder. The wolf below turned its head and vanished into the trees. No sound, no rustle, just gone. Mare felt cold drip down her spine that had nothing to do with the storm. She tightened her grip, pushed forward. The terrain grew steeper, and her boots slipped more often. Every root felt like it was placed to trip her. Every branch leaned down like it wanted to hold her back. But she kept moving. Her arms ached. Her breath came sharp. Still, she moved. The baby pressed its forehead to her neck. It was shaking now. Not from cold, from knowing. Lightning lit up the slope, white and harsh. No thunder this time, just the flash. And in that half-second of daylight, Mare saw it. Footprints. Not hers, not boots. Bare, massive, pressed into the soft moss with just enough weight to mark, but not to sink. Too wide to be human, the step length too long. And yet, the prints were light, lighter than they should have been, like something heavy had moved with intention. She stood still, the rain soft now, more mist than water. Her heart beat in her ears. They were being watched. Not hunted, not yet, but known. She turned toward the cliff wall ahead. The trees parted just enough to show a wedge of rock, half hidden, covered in leaves and fog. Nestled inside it, like someone had built it with care, was a platform. Not wood, not stone. A bed of woven branches, leaves stacked thick, layered with moss. Elevated, hidden, protected from rain. The baby stirred again, eyes suddenly wide. It reached out, not with fear, with memory. She stepped forward. No more thunder, no more lightning. Just the whisper of rain and the soft call of some bird too stubborn to hide. She crouched beside the platform and lowered the child onto it. It resisted at first, gripping her collar. Then it looked at the nest, the way a child might look at an old, familiar bedroom after being gone too long. Its fingers released. She set it down gently. The platform cradled its shape like it had been made just for that size. Maybe it had. Mare sat back on her heels, heart still racing, arms trembling from holding more than just weight. She didn't know if she'd done the right thing. But the way the child exhaled, the way it settled, eyes half-lidded but alert, told her this wasn't just a shelter. It was a waypoint, a safe place. Not just in geography and memory. She leaned against the rock and closed her eyes. Just for a moment. A breeze moved through the trees then, sudden and cool, not part of the storm. It carried a scent, earth and ash and something sharper, something wild. She opened her eyes. Nothing had changed, but she knew. Something was near, watching from the tree line. Waiting, but not stepping forward. She looked down at the child. Its eyes were open. It was looking too, and it wasn't afraid. Mare pulled her coat tight again, sat still, let the rain come, let the quiet hold. And in that space, for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like an intruder. Just a guest. The forest hadn't let her in. The child had. And now, the forest was deciding what to do with that. The smell hit her before she saw anything. Gun oil sharp and clinging, mixed with the sour tang of old sweat and canned meat. Mare stopped just behind a thicket of young pine, heart slowing, lungs refusing to take a full breath. The baby shifted slightly in her arms, heavier now from exhaustion than resistance. It had dozed for part of the climb, but even in sleep, its body twitched at every sudden snap of a twig beneath her boot. She could tell it didn't trust the quiet anymore. Neither did she. The trees thinned out just ahead, giving way to a man-made clearing that didn't belong to the forest. No trail markers, no official signs, just gear, tracks, and tension hung like wires between branches. She crouched, adjusted the baby against her shoulder, and studied the scene. It wasn't a campsite meant for resting. 3 canvas tents, military style, sun-bleached and stained at the corners. Tarps draped over piles of gear, coolers, crates, bundled chains. A fire pit built up high with rocks, but no smoke rising. The ashes looked fresh. Still warm, but not glowing. A pair of lawn chairs faced the forest's edge like lookouts, but no one sat in them. And along the tree trunks nearby, she spotted wires strung knee-height, the kind hunters use for snares, but not for deer. No salt licks, no camo blinds. This wasn't about game. She moved slow, keeping to shadow. Her eyes caught the ground first, a crumpled rag half buried in the mud. She reached for it, fingertips brushing the corner. It lifted easily, stiff from dried water and stained with something darker. When she turned it over, she froze. Tufts of fur. Not coarse like a raccoon or bobcat. Longer, softer. A deep brown, almost black, and tangled with dried blood. Her stomach knotted. She looked toward the tarp pile. One corner had come loose, revealing a metal trap with dried leaves sticking to its jaws. The kind with steel teeth. Illegal in this county. Someone had hurt one, not the baby, an adult. She shifted again and spotted something worse. Small red flags stuck in the soil, each one numbered, forming a tight triangle just 10 paces into the trees. Markers. Someone had tracked movement and logged it. She didn't need to guess what they'd been hoping to catch in the middle. Movement near the tent. She ducked low behind a log. Boots, faded jeans tucked in. A man stepped into the open, head bare, shirt unbuttoned halfway down, a rifle slung lazily over one shoulder. He didn't look like a hunter, more like someone who thought the woods owed him something. Mare waited. Another voice, lower, cautious. "You hear it again last night?" "Could have been anything," the first man said, kicking a rock into the ashes. "No, you said 3 knocks, same as before, same direction. Means it's close. And if it's close, Boone'll want it boxed before the rain hits again." Mare's breath tightened. Boone. Of course it was him. He wasn't from these parts, but he'd been showing up more since fall, asking questions that didn't belong, buying supplies in bulk, tipping too much at the diner when someone looked the other way. She'd seen the way he stared at the tree lines, like he thought the forest was keeping a secret from him, and he was owed every piece of it. She shifted back, keeping low. Then she heard it. A familiar voice, lower and rougher than it used to be. Frank Mallory, the deputy who used to flirt more than enforce. She hadn't seen him since last winter, not since his brother died out west, and something in him hollowed out. He wasn't wearing his badge now. He stepped out from the side of the camp, coat zipped high, hands in his pockets. His eyes flicked across the trees, resting just for a second where Mare crouched, but not long enough to say he saw her. Still, her heart jumped. "I told you," Frank muttered to Boone. "This side's too close to town." Boone didn't look up. "Then we finished quick." Frank shifted, rubbing his jaw. "You don't get to decide quick. You said this was about watching, observing. That was before we found the den," Boone said, voice too calm. "That was before we saw the kid." Mari's stomach dropped. Frank moved toward the largest tent. "And if the mother comes back?" "Then we film it, or we don't. Either way, it's leverage." Mare's pulse raced. Her hand instinctively cradled the baby tighter. She backed up, step by step, moving around the far side of the clearing. The tarp flapped again behind her, and something white slipped out. Paper. A notebook, half buried under a boot print. She paused, scanned the camp, then stepped forward and slid it free. She opened it just enough to see the inside. Coordinates, dates, sketches. The last page read, "Con Non, sighted limping, confirmed, smaller than Boone expected, still viable." Her throat went dry. They'd known. They'd been following it longer than she had it. Long enough to plan. She shut the notebook and slid it into her coat, then moved back through the trees, circling wide around the camp. She didn't breathe again until the voices faded behind the breeze. When she reached the edge of the creek again, someone stood waiting. Frank, not in the open. Off the trail, just far enough to be between duty and guilt. He didn't say her name. Just nodded once, eyes scanning the bundle in her arms. Then his shoulders dropped. "You need to leave," he said. "I wasn't planning on staying," she answered. He stepped closer. "It's not a hunt, not really. Boone's not after meat, he's after proof." She met his gaze. "You going to stop him?" Frank looked away. "He's got photos. Of me, from back in '93. They could end everything. That your excuse?" He winced. Mare shifted the child in her arms. "It's scared, hurt, and you let men like that build cages in your forest." Frank's voice dropped. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. I thought if we watched, if we just saw, maybe it'd help people understand." "People don't understand what they want to kill." He didn't argue. Then his voice softened. "You shouldn't be here. You think I don't know that?" He looked down, then back at her. "You got somewhere safe?" "No," she said, "but I've got somewhere far." He pulled something from his pocket, an old flashlight, scratched but still working. There's a trail. Runs past the old ranger station. Boone doesn't know about it. You follow it west, you'll hit a drop-off. Then a ridge. That's where the land gets steep. Too steep for them to follow fast. She didn't thank him, just nodded. Frank hesitated, then reached into his coat again. He pulled out a photo. It was black and white, grainy. A tall figure, fur soaked in blood, hunched over something limp. Beside it, a second figure. Smaller, face twisted in pain, holding out one hand. Mother and child. Captured, caught. They won't stop, Frank said. Not until one of them's dead. She stared at the photo, then tore it in half and let it fall into the creek. The baby stirred. Thunder rolled again, this time sharper, closer. Boone's voice echoed faint in the distance, calling for someone. Frank stepped back into the trees. Go, he said, and Mare went. With no map, no plan, only the sound of breath against her chest, and the certainty that they weren't alone out here. But alone might have been safer. The shot cracked through the trees like something breaking open the sky. Not a warning, not a misfire. A signal. Mare didn't flinch. Her jaw tightened, feet already moving, boots sinking into wet pine needles as she pushed deeper into the gorge. Behind her, the ridgeline where she'd last seen Frank vanished into the gray swell of morning fog, and she didn't look back. The little one in her arms didn't cry, but its entire body turned to stone. Not from pain this time. This was something older. The way a wild thing freezes when it remembers too much. Mare could feel the tension in its limbs, every breath shallow and stalled, like sound itself had become dangerous. She adjusted her coat to wrap it tighter. The forest narrowed around her, the trees leaning in. The air got heavier, pressed against her ears like a storm not quite arrived. But that wasn't thunder. That was something else. Footsteps, careful, quick, approached from the western trail, just above the creek bed. She slowed, crouching behind a rock shelf where the slope dipped. The baby shifted, eyes alert again, watching the shadows, but not with fear this time, with knowing. Then came the voice, low, familiar. Mare? She stood, and there he was, Dr. Calvin Sutter. Raincoat half-zipped, glasses fogged, his hair damp and flattened to one side like he'd left in a hurry. He carried no weapon, just a faded canvas bag swinging from one shoulder and a white-knuckled grip on a flashlight that wasn't on. Pearl sent me, he said, breath short. She said you might need help. Mare didn't speak. Not yet. Just watched him scan her face, then lower his gaze to the bundle in her arms. The recognition was instant. His shoulders fell, mouth opened and closed, and she saw the weight of it settle in behind his ribs. Not fear, not disbelief, just gravity. I brought what I could, he said, reaching into his bag. Gauze, alcohol, antiseptic. It's the leg, right? Jessie said it was limping. She nodded. He moved closer, gently unwrapping the bandage she'd improvised back in the ravine. He worked fast, silent, but his hands never shook. Years in backwoods practice had trained him for unexpected things. But nothing like this. As he cleaned the wound, he murmured under his breath. Not to her, not to the baby. To the air, maybe. As if to keep from screaming. It's a snare cut, he said finally. The kind they use on coyotes. That line pattern on the fur, see that? That's from a slip knot catch, steel cable. Boone's style. Mare's eyes sharpened. You've seen his traps before. Calvin nodded. Last winter, we found a bobcat with its front paw nearly severed. Same cable bite, same wire loops. I asked him straight to his face. He laughed. Said the forest didn't have rules, just outcomes. She wrapped the baby again, slow, careful. Calvin stood, wiping his hands. Boone's not after discovery, Mare. He's after spectacle. The coordinates he shared. I thought it was some backwoods biology stunt. I thought he was just filming migration patterns or sound tests. But he's been selling them. Selling them to who? Hunters, collectors. The kind that don't care what it is as long as it's rare and scared. He had a buyer lined up for what he called event footage. I didn't ask what that meant. I should have. Mare looked toward the trees. The wind had shifted again, coming low, slow, up from the creek. It carried the smell of wet rock and something fouler beneath. Gun oil, sweat, plastic wrap. He wanted the baby as bait, she said. Calvin didn't answer. He didn't have to. He's hoping the mother will come back, show herself. He's more than hoping, Calvin said. He's got motion sensors wired in the brush and a mic on the ridge trail, all linked to a sat phone feed. She closed her eyes for a breath. He wants the reunion on camera, she said. He nodded. And the kill, she added. Calvin's throat worked hard to swallow that one. He told Frank it was just observation, said it'd make people believe, but the second Boone saw blood, he changed the plan. He always does. A second shot rang out. Closer this time, not aimed, not necessary. Just noise, just a net tightening. The baby curled tighter into Mare's chest, hands clenched, eyes open but unfocused. She felt its heart, pounding faster than it should have been able to survive. We can't go back to town, she said. They'd follow, set a trap right there, dress it up in legal words. There's one way left, Calvin said. The pass beyond Dry Needle Bluff. You know it? She did. She remembered it from her younger days. Too narrow for trucks, too steep for horses, but clean enough if you knew where to put your feet. The cliff wound around a ridge and dropped into the darker part of the forest, where the ground never fully dried and the moss grew on every side of a tree. You take that route, he said, and you vanish. She nodded once. Calvin hesitated. You won't have help past that point. Good, she said. Then came the part she didn't expect. The baby raised its hand. Not fast, not panicked, but with slow precision. It pointed, not at the ridge, not at Calvin, at the ground. Mare followed the gesture. Hickory shells, split, clean, left in a crooked little line along the trail's edge. Not many, just enough to say, this way. Someone had placed them deliberately. Recently. She stepped closer. The first shell was still warm from a palm. Calvin leaned down, picked one up. His eyes went wide. This wasn't you. She shook her head. The baby pointed again. It knew where home was. And someone had shown it the way. She met Calvin's eyes. They're not hiding anymore. He nodded slowly. They're guiding. She adjusted the child, kissed the top of its head without thinking. Then she turned toward the trail, where the shells curved out of sight between thick trunks. Mare, Calvin called after her. She turned back. If you see her, the mother, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her some of us knew better. We just didn't know soon enough. Mare didn't say she would. She didn't need to. She walked. The baby didn't tremble this time. It watched the path. Each shell, each turn. Behind her, the woods breathed in. And somewhere far off, Boone cursed into a static-filled radio that didn't answer anymore. By late afternoon, the light had changed. Not dimmer, not yet, but dull in that way fall sometimes crept in early, like the sun was second-guessing itself behind a thin layer of high cloud. Mare noticed the shift in color first, not in the sky, but in the trees. The green had gone tired. The edges of the sweet gums wore red like old bruises. Even the oaks had begun shedding leaves in ones and twos, like the forest had reached the end of its sentence and was ready to be quiet again. She kept walking, one hand steady under the little one's weight. It had fallen asleep not long after they passed the bluff. Real sleep this time, not the fevered collapse of shock or exhaustion, but something deeper, steadier. The kind of sleep a child only finds when they know someone is watching the world for them. The shells had stopped. Hickory, pine, bits of woven grass. All gone now. She was on her own again, though somehow it didn't feel like alone. Her boots found the old wagon track, barely visible, just twin faint lines pressed into the earth from another century. That's how she knew she was close. The old trail cut toward a valley hollowed out like a bowl between ridges. And in the center of that bowl stood the place she'd only ever passed once before, years ago, back when she and Pearl had still taken morning walks just to name plants they already knew. She found the cabin by sound before she saw it. A soft rhythmic knock, wood against stone, steady and purposeful. Not warning, not code, just work. Something being done by hands that had done it before. She rounded the last bend and saw Pearl Wainwright kneeling beside a low fire ring, arranging a circle of cedar kindling with the patience of a woman who had lived long enough to know how fire teaches you more than it takes. Pearl didn't startle, didn't look up right away. She just placed the last branch, straightened her back, and said, "You're late." Mare almost smiled. "I was walking." Pearl turned. Her hair had grown longer since spring, braided down her back. Her boots were older than the fire pit, and her face had more grace lines than Mare remembered. But her eyes, those stayed sharp. She looked at the bundle in Mare's arms and didn't blink. "Well," she said, her voice just as matter-of-fact as always. "So that part's true." Mare shifted the baby slightly. It stirred, but didn't wake. Pearl stood and dusted off her knees. "Get inside. You've got blood on your coat and a storm in your voice." The cabin creaked when they entered. Not from age, but from habit. Wood that recognized familiar steps. Mare hadn't crossed that threshold in almost 5 years. Not since Pearl's sister passed, and the grief had drawn lines between people too stubborn to speak around them. Pearl pointed to the old cot near the stove. "Set it there. It'll be warmest when night comes." Mary laid the little one down gently. The baby's eyes flickered open just enough to register the shift, then closed again without fear. Pearl watched the way Mare touched its shoulder, the way her fingers lingered a moment longer than they needed to. She didn't ask what it was. She didn't need to. Instead, she asked, "Is it alone?" Mare shook her head. "Not yet." "Then we'll be careful." They sat for a while in the quiet. Pearl brewed tea like she always had. Loose leaf and bark, no bag, no sugar. The bitter kind that warmed you slow and steady, like truth. She handed Mare a mug and sat back down. "You remember the winter of '81? Pearl asked. Mare nodded. "Snow came too early. The deer ran low. Folks started hearing things they didn't talk about come spring." Mare took a sip. "I was chopping wood out back," Pearl said. "Had the fire going. You remember those wind chimes I had?" "From the salvage yard?" "Yeah. Old bike chains and tin spoons. They were going quiet. That's how I knew something was near. I turned, and there it was." Mare didn't interrupt. Tall, not rushing, not hiding. Just standing there like it was checking on the house, like it wanted to make sure I wasn't dead. Mare exhaled through her nose. Pearl looked at the fire. "I never told anyone, but I think it was watching the flame. The way it flickered." "Why now?" Mare asked. "Why show up now?" Pearl didn't answer. She just nodded once toward the window. The woods outside had stilled again, but not with fear, with intention. Later that night, when the wind picked up, Mare stepped out onto the porch. The sky had darkened to that quiet blue that comes before rain, deep enough to swallow detail, soft enough to feel personal. She looked down the trail, where the trees arched together like they'd built a gate no one had the right to walk through. And that's when she saw it, on the path leading into the woods, fresh, barely minutes old. A series of leaves laid upside down, not scattered, not blown, placed. Their undersides paler, lighter, veins facing up like small maps. She stepped closer. The line curved slightly, forming a gentle crescent along the trail. She looked behind her. Pearl stood in the doorway, her arms folded but not tense. "Markers," Mare said. Pearl nodded. "That's how they talk, with what's already here." Mare followed the arc of leaves. At the end, the trail bent left, toward a place she'd never dared go when she was younger. The ridge near Slate Hollow. People said wind didn't carry there, said voices got stuck. As Mare stepped forward, the baby stirred inside. Not awake, but restless. She hesitated. Pearl's voice came low, steady. You'll need to go soon. I know. And not the old trail. They've laid bait there. Boone's got sensors in the runoff ditch. I know that too. Pearl looked at the child. It knows where to go. You just have to keep up. Mare crouched beside the baby. Its eyes opened. Slow, clear. I'm not leading anymore, she whispered. You are. The baby reached out, one finger brushing the dirt near the base of a cedar stump. Mare followed its gaze. The shadows moved differently there, thicker, like water. She stood, adjusted her coat. Pearl handed her a flask. For your nerves, she said. Or his. Mare took it. And then, just as she turned to leave, she saw it. Off to the side of the porch, between two trees, a trap. Half hidden, fresh bait, old leaves cleared, wire set, clever, subtle, almost clean. She turned to Pearl. Pearl's voice was firm now. I check every morning, and every damn time there's a new one. Mare's throat tightened. Boone's that close? He never left. He just waits for someone else to open the door. Mare walked over and disarmed the snare. Not with panic, with practice. Then she lifted the wire and snapped it in half with her boot. Behind her, the baby made a sound. Not a cry. Something deeper. Mare listened. Not human, not animal. But it meant not that way. She turned, followed its lead. The leaves under her feet shifted. Not louder, just clearer, as if they wanted to be found. And somewhere, beyond the edge of the clearing, the trees opened to a line only a mother would recognize. But she wasn't the mother. She was just the one who stayed long enough to bring the child home. And tonight, the forest had made its decision. It would hold the ring, for now. The ground trembled before the sound ever reached her. Just a breath of motion, like something enormous shifting far beneath the surface. Not thunder, not machinery. Deeper, the kind of vibration that rolls through trees before it ever touches the air. Mare stopped mid-step and held her breath. Even the baby froze against her chest, its arms locked in tight, eyes open and alert now. Not scared, just still. Mist curled around them like breath off a slow river. It had rolled in from nowhere. Wasn't there 5 minutes ago? Then suddenly all around. Thick and silver and damp, filling the spaces between trees, softening the sound of her steps, muting the crunch of dry needles underfoot. It didn't feel like weather. It felt like warning. She pressed forward, boots sinking half an inch into the wet loam. Her eyes scanned ahead, but the fog swallowed anything more than a dozen yards out. Even the trees felt closer, thicker, like the forest had pulled tight around them. No birds, no wind. Just silence stretched taut enough to break. The baby shifted, not restless, just tense. Like it knew, like it remembered. Then the mist parted, not like fog rolling back, not natural. More like it stepped aside, split down the middle in a slow, quiet opening, revealing what waited just beyond the veil. Shapes. At first, only one. Tall, motionless, shoulders like carved stone. Then another, and another. They emerged from the haze in total silence. Shadows with mass. One on the left moved, just a slight shift of weight, but it made no sound. Not even the leaves beneath its feet responded. There were at least 6 now, maybe more behind them. They stood wide in the shoulders, covered in deep fur that shimmered wet in the low light, steam rising from their backs like the trees were exhaling. No aggression, no movement forward. They were standing in a loose circle, spaced wide, enclosing the path just enough to say, "This is a boundary." And then one stepped out from the center, taller than the rest. Shoulders scarred, hair darker at the chest, flecked with something that could have been ash or time. The others didn't move as she passed through. Her presence cut straight through the line like heat through cold water. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked with the weight of something ancient and precise. The baby saw her first. Its whole body twitched once, then locked still. Then its hand lifted, fingers out, palm up, not reaching, just showing, offering recognition. That was all it needed. The mother stopped 10 feet from Mare. No sound, no growl, no words. But the forest filled with something anyway. Not dread, not power, just presence. The kind that doesn't need to declare itself to be understood. Mare didn't move. She looked into that face, so human in its structure, so unlike anything she'd ever seen in its depth. The eyes were the same shape as the baby's, the same dark luster. But in the mother's eyes, there was history. Fire and rain and loss. In the set of her jaw was a story Mare didn't know but could feel, deep and old and sharp. The baby reached again. Mare's hands shook. Slowly, she crouched, pulling the coat open just enough to let the baby free. It didn't hesitate. It slid from her arms, one leg still stiff, the other trembling with effort, and took 2 small steps forward. The mother didn't reach for it. She waited. The baby crossed the space like it had walked it before, like it remembered. When it reached her, it touched her leg once, and then leaned forward. The mother knelt. Not fast, not dramatic, just low enough to meet it face to face. She cupped the back of its head with one massive hand and pressed her forehead gently to its own, and the sound that followed broke something in Mare's chest. It wasn't a word, it wasn't a cry, it was a hum, low, ancient, like stone warmed by sun, like rain singing in caves. The mother held the baby there, and the hum deepened. Vibrations moved through the air and into the trees, and the others, still in their circle, closed their eyes in stillness. The forest around them changed. Not visibly, but Mare felt it in her lungs, in her bones. She was witnessing something sacred. She didn't know how long the moment lasted. The baby's fingers found the mother's fur and gripped. The hum softened, then faded. And then the mother turned to Mare, looked at her fully, not with suspicion, not with thanks, with something deeper, something exact, recognition, not of face, of action, of choice. Her eyes didn't flicker, didn't search, just stared into Mare as if sorting through every moment she'd carried the baby, every time she'd wrapped it against the cold, or spoke soft even when afraid. And after that long look, just before the mother turned away, she dipped her chin once. Not a bow, not submission, acknowledgement. Then something shifted behind Mare. Branches snapped low, fast, controlled. Boone. She turned before she saw him, already knowing. The man moved like he didn't belong to the forest. Too loud, too eager, even when trying to be careful. His boots crushed moss that had grown a decade. In his left hand, he held a small camcorder. In his right, a flare gun. He didn't speak. He raised the camcorder, hit record, and then, slow as anything, lifted the flare. Behind him, Frank appeared, rushing up from the trees, jacket open, weapon not drawn, but ready. His face twisted between panic and something worse. "Boone," he barked. But Boone didn't lower the flare. The mother stood slowly. She didn't show fear. The others stepped closer. Boone shouted, "Back up! Don't move! We got the shot! Just need a few more seconds!" Frank grabbed Boone's arm, hard. "They're not attacking!" Boone snarled. "Then why are they circling us?" Frank looked around. Then he understood. "They're not circling us," he said. "They're circling her." Mare stepped between them. Boone hesitated just long enough. Frank moved fast, too fast for Boone to react, and knocked the flare from his hand. It hit the ground with a soft clatter and skidded across wet stone. No one reached for it. No one needed to, because the circle held. The tribe, 8, maybe more, had closed around the mother and child. Not trapping, not shielding. Framing, as if to say, this is all you get. This is all you were ever meant to see. Mare watched the baby press its face into the mother's neck. The mother's eyes found Mare one more time, and then she reached into a satchel of fur at her side and pulled out something blackened, charred. She stepped forward, just enough, and placed it on the ground between them. Mare crouched, picked it up. It was a piece of wood. Charred, nearly black, still warm, broken in half. A message. Not just a gift, not just goodbye. A line. This far, no farther. The mother turned. The baby didn't look back. The tribe moved with them, their bodies vanishing into the fog like shapes slipping underwater. In less than a minute, they were gone. Mare stood still. Frank stared at the space where they'd been, breathing hard, eyes glassy. Boone picked up his camera, tried to play back the footage. Nothing. Static. The tape flickered once, then snapped. Mare looked at him. He looked smaller now. Frank didn't say a word. He just stepped closer to Mare, and together they stood in the mist. Not alone. Not anymore. The line had been drawn, and something far older than laws had made itself known. By the time Mare stepped through the back gate of her yard, the first frost had already taken hold of the grass. Not the hard kind that crackled under boots, just a light shimmer, like the cold had come gentle this year, not yet sure if it was welcome. The last of the red leaves clung to the low branches along the fence. October was breathing out slowly now, and in that quiet, the town below Ouachita Ridge carried on like nothing had shifted. But she had. She moved slower these days. Not from age, from weight. From the shape silence takes when you've heard something no one else will ever believe. She hung her coat on the nail outside the door. Same coat, same tear along the hem, still holding the faintest scent of pine smoke and damp fur if she leaned close enough. Inside, the stove clicked as it warmed. The kettle, always the first to speak, let out a soft hiss. She sat at the table without turning on the overhead light. There was enough coming through the windows, and enough in her chest to keep the dark from creeping in. Boone had disappeared 3 days after the fog. No search party, no sheriff call, no rumors strong enough to make it past the truck stop. He just stopped showing up. His cabin, when someone finally got curious, was stripped bare. Not in a rush, in a plan, like he'd meant to vanish. The kind of man who'd rather leave a trail of mystery than face the fact that he'd been bested by something older, kinder, and far more dangerous than himself. Frank stayed. Quietly, without badge or uniform. He returned to the edges of the department, doing paperwork, showing up when storms knocked out power. Nothing more, but folks noticed. He smiled less, walked softer, and he stopped carrying a sidearm. When asked why, he said something about respect. Nobody pressed. As for Jesse, he started showing up at Mare's porch once a week. No reason, no invitation. Sometimes with firewood, sometimes just with silence. He had that look now, the look of someone who'd seen a seam ripped open in the fabric of the world and chose not to stitch it closed. Mare liked him more for it. But the town, well, the town stayed as towns do. People had too many bills and not enough time to wonder what slipped between the trees. A few stories floated in on cold nights. Talk of lights in the fog. Shapes on the hill above the grain silo. Someone said they heard a sound like a bear humming a lullaby, but they laughed when they said it. Not the cruel kind of laugh, just the kind that keeps the world manageable. And Mare never said a word. She folded the church altar cloths every Thursday without fail. Warm hands, tired knees. Some women smiled at her a little longer now. Others glanced away quicker than before. A few tried to get her talking about what she'd been up to those weeks she vanished upstate, about what really happened with Boone, about the baby animals she was supposedly seen carrying. She answered none of it. Just smoothed the linen between her fingers, said something about the weather, and let the silence do the rest. Until the morning she opened her front door and found something waiting on the steps. No note, no box. Just a single braid of field grass, tight, clean, fresh dew clinging to the strands. And no footprints. Not a single mark in the frost. She bent slowly, picked it up, held it against her palm like it might vanish. It hadn't been left for attention. It had been left for her. Mare stood in the doorway longer than she needed to. Not crying, not wondering, just remembering the weight of small arms wrapped around her neck. The press of a trembling body, learning somehow to trust her warmth. The steady, hum-like sound of a mother's voice reverberating through fog and into the marrow of her own bones. That night she slept without dreams. But when she woke just before dawn, something inside her stirred. She walked to the kitchen, barefoot, slow, and when she reached the window, she saw it. Out at the edge of the field, where the woods began again, stood two figures. One tall, one small. The smaller one turned first. Didn't wave, just lifted its arm once, open hand, palm wide, then dropped it slowly to its side. And then they were gone. Not vanished at all. Just returned to where they'd always been. She didn't go after them. Didn't need to. The next few months came quiet. She planted less that season. Spent more time on the porch, watching the wind move through the low pine at the back fence. Some nights, she thought she heard a knock. Just one, sometimes three. Always soft. She never opened the door for them. Never needed to. They weren't calls for her, just reminders. The woods still held what she'd left behind, and she'd been allowed to carry a piece of it with her. There were moments after, when the memory struck out of nowhere. The way the baby had curled its fingers in her shirt. The way the mother had looked at her. Not with language, but with history. Like she'd seen every loss Mare had ever lived and still decided she was worthy of return. One night, not long after the first hard freeze, Mare dreamed again. The child was older now, taller, hair darker, standing beside a stream she didn't recognize. The mother stood behind it, one hand resting on its shoulder, the other on her own heart. The child looked at her and smiled. Not like a person, but not unlike either. It reached one arm out. Then the fog came, curling in soft, and just before it swallowed them whole again, the child turned and waved. Mare woke with wet cheeks and a steady breath. Outside, a wind chime rattled against the porch post. Just once, and then stillness. She rose, opened the door. There, on the bottom step, was another braid of grass. This one looped into a circle, and Mare, without thinking, placed it in her palm, brought it to her chest, and whispered, "I remember." The forest hadn't asked her to save anything. It had just asked her to carry something far enough until it could find its way home again. And she had. Maybe that's what kindness really was. Not fixing, not fighting. Just standing still when something small and scared needed you not to run. And in the end, that had been enough. Sometimes, the greatest thing you can do for a wild and wounded thing is not to change it. Not to claim it, but to carry it quietly, gently, until it remembers what direction it was born to go. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it leaves you something behind. A piece of trust, a ring of grass, a part of your heart you thought was lost, but wasn't. Not really. It just needed time, and a path, and someone willing to walk it. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones we shout from mountaintops, but the ones we carry quietly in our chest. Stories no one else sees us live, and yet somehow, they shape everything we become. In a world that moves too fast, that fills our ears with noise and our days with distraction, there's something sacred about stillness, about choosing to listen to what doesn't speak in words. The rustle of trees, the hush before the rain, the deep breath of something unseen choosing not to harm, simply because you chose not to fear. There are truths too old for language. Love that doesn't need names. Wounds that don't leave scars. Only deeper ways of seeing. And sometimes, the most human thing we can do is offer safety to something we don't understand. Not because it earns it. Not because we'll be praised. But because we recognize the ache of being alone. And we know what it feels like to be met with mercy. This story isn't just about what lives beyond the trees. It's about what lives in us when we decide that empathy matters more than explanation. That presence matters more than proof. That compassion, offered freely, without expectation, is its own kind of miracle. And maybe, just maybe, there's a kind of healing that only comes when we stop trying to fix everything and simply choose to witness it with care. The wilderness teaches this, if we're willing to learn. Not all wild things need taming. Some just need space. Some just need time. Some just need to know they are not hunted, not feared, not alone. And the same can be said for people. Kindness is never wasted, even when it feels small, especially when it's quiet. A hand offered in silence, a step taken in trust, a burden carried without demand. These are the acts that echo loudest, long after the world stops watching. In the end, what we protect, what we choose to stand beside when no one else will, says more about who we are than any words ever could. And if we're lucky, the things we once sheltered might one day turn back, even for a moment, and remind us that we mattered, that we were part of something bigger, that we were not forgotten. Thank you for sitting with this story. Thank you for listening between the words. If it stirred something in you, if it reminded you of something you've held on to, or something you've had to let go of, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to leave a comment below and share what spoke to you most. And if stories like this speak to your heart, I invite you to subscribe and stay with us for more. There's a place here for you, one where the quiet matters, where mystery is welcome, and where the wild is treated not as something to fear, but as something to honor. We'll keep the fire warm,